Collectors have the most amazing stuff in their houses, and some of it hasn't seen the light of day for years. I love doing appraisal fairs because I get to see it and I get to show you. Today we have some things that are absolutely unique and a bunch of really cool stuff that people brought, so let's go see what they have.
My father's family lived out in Tucumcari, New Mexico, and Santa Fe for a little bit and came back to Indiana. And it was given to the family, and then I received it. So I know it's at least 80 years old, but that's all I know.
It's cool. And that is about the age that it should be. This would have been something they would have sold along Route 66, which Tucumcari is right in the middle of. And so, and it's done in a fairly light wood. It's interesting because we see later versions of these and the painting is a little... Well, compared to this era, the painting is super perfect on the brand new one. So this definitely tells us this has age. It's also just a little bit worn from having been handled a few times, which is the way it should be for an older piece. So I think it's really endearing. And I would say that the value on this is probably somewhere in the 175 to 2 1/4 range. Yep, that's big, all right. How did you get this piece?
Family.
Family?
It's my mother's.
Oh, that's great. Your era on this is likely to be sometime around 1930 or slightly before, maybe even as early as the late teens, early 20s. These tapestries were really popular because William Randolph Hearst started buying the old ones that dated back to like early Renaissance period and hanging them in his house at San Simeon. And people would see it in the newsreels, and then it became very popular. So when they had the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago, the Belgian and French pavilions sold tons of this sort of thing. Sometimes they were framed and sometimes they were not. Usually they were sold loose and then people had a frame done. And I think that's what is the case on this one, because I see the way it's sort of tucked in here. So I think that they bought this and then really liked it and wanted to preserve it. It's lost a little of its color. I don't think that really matters. The piece has also lost a little of its color. It was probably displayed where there was some sunlight at one time. And there's a little rent here. So, you know, it's not absolutely perfect, but it is really cool. And the size is really good. We see them out of the frames half the size for $45 consistently. So you can kind of work up from there. But it's a really nice piece, and it's good that it stayed in the family. And this one's a little more engaging than some of them too, because
there seems to be, the more you look at it, the more things.
The more things happening, exactly. And some of them, there's so much happening that it's really a whole lot of little detail you lose. But what I like about this is that you've got two with the arch flower and this. So it's sort of a repeating pattern with this at the center. So it's very clear and you can really see all of it. I think it's great. This is really neat. How did you get it? You said you haven't had it long.
I bought it at a yard sale at the old hospital there in Marion. I paid $2 for it.
Wow. That's amazing. Deer gazelle, I guess it's a deer actually, because he doesn't have the big horn like a gazelle. But it's a very cute 1950s lamp base with this amazing shade. And I have to be honest with you, I don't think this shade was on it originally. I think this shade is older than the lamp.
Well, I saw the lamp and I said, how much you want for these? At $2. And we were looking around. I got a shade in the basement that goes on it. You want it?
Ah, okay. So they had the shade downstairs that they figured went with it, and you got the shade. The copper shade is really interesting and unusual. And usually when we see copper shades with this mesh like this, they're going to date back to sometime around 19-teens or 20s, and the lamp is 1950s. So you've got two really neat pieces. This would have probably had a fiberglass shade originally. One of those 50s ones in sort of that beige color with the black squiggles and stuff on it. Lamp companies kind of came and went, and they would just assemble lamps out of parts made by other people. So probably Hager Potteries would be my guess, made the base, and then some lamp company wired it together and put it together. But this shade would have more likely come off of a 1920s era table lamp. The shade, even a little bit as it is probably worth about $50 to $75 by itself. And the lamp, even though he got a little bit of a bruise, $25, $30 without a shade. So you did great, and you got something really interesting. I would love to see the lamp this originally came on. My guess is that it probably had a copper base as well. Yeah, it looks sort of brown and muddy, but if you had light coming through it, it really changes it, because I can tell when I hold it up here with the mesh. My guess is that this piece probably was made by Dodge Company out of Los Angeles, who did a lot of copper pieces, and that it probably had a figural base that was made of a copper or a copper washed item. And so, now you have two things to look for. Oh, this is a nice piece. We don't see this too often. It's Weller Pottery. Silver Tone is the name of this pattern. It's one of their more collectible patterns. A lot of these ones with this particular ink stamp were done right before the Depression. And so a lot of these were not in the line very long because the Depression came and they had to really simplify things to be able to stay in business. Weller was out of Zanesville, Ohio, and at one time was the largest pottery company in the world. And so you'd think you would see more of this stuff, but you really don't. I had the bowl in this. I sold the bowl for $225. I think the vases run about $145 a piece. So you've got a pair, so you're probably looking around $300. You got it at an antique store or a sale?
The big antique show in Louisville.
Oh, the big show at the convention center, yes.
It was the most unique thing I saw on the entire floor, and so I bought it.
It is beautiful. Do you mind me asking what you got it for?
$230.
$230. Well, yeah, I'd say you got a great deal on it.
And every time I show it to a jeweler, they try to buy it.
Yeah, that gives you an idea. When the jewelers want to buy it, you know that it's good. This is a lavalier, and it would have been made probably around 1910. When you look up close, it has rose cut, and I believe mine cut diamonds as well. Those do look like real pearl to me. And I do believe you're right about the clasp having been replaced, but they were very good about one thing with the clasp. They used an Italian clasp, but it actually has the mark 585 for white gold. The rest of the piece, I think, probably is white gold as well. For that reason alone, I think you got a really good deal. Whether this was a jeweler who worked with Tiffany and went on their own, I can't ascertain that. I'm not seeing another mark to go on. I know you thought the piece was marked.
That came with it, with the gentleman's name and then a little bit of history, but it was only a paragraph, and I can't remember the guy's name. Still in the safe. I just couldn't lay my hands on it this morning.
I would love to know that, because I think it might make a difference in the value, but I will tell you that this piece, if it isn't a famous maker, is still probably worth about 3 times what you paid for it. Which would be somewhere in the $750, $850 range. Okay. And if it turns out that there is provenance that connects it to a good maker, well, then you might be looking at 2 or 3 times that. So I can only tell you what I can see, and what I can see is a piece that I think is probably worth about $750. Okay. But if it does turn out that it has some provenance for the maker that is significant, then we coid throw that out the window and try again.
Father ran a bowling alley in New Jersey, and somebody owed him a debt back in the 60s and traded that for the debt.
That's wonderful.
I'm not sure I should pass that story along either, but you asked, and that's the answer.
That is a good story, and I think that your dad came out well. Let's see here. It does have a French signature on the back of the base, but it is not a particularly famous artist in and of itself. The desire for these is more about the contrast, the way they use the celluloid for the faces and the busts, and then contrast that with the bronze. This was very popular to do, like you see those old lamps by Herdago from Italy from about 1930 like this. This piece appears to be French. J.B. Hirsch in the United States did this sort of thing. It was a really fun way to add texture and color and soften the face and make it a little more human-like, and it was very popular around 1930. This is a good piece, and I hope the guy owed your dad a little bit of money, because this piece is now probably worth about $300. So you said your grandfather had this, and that makes sense, because that would put it back to about 1900, and this is a celluloid advertising pocket match safe Vesta. The stick matches would go in this top here, if we can get this open. There we go. And the reason that you carried this around is because until the 1890s, there's the striker on the bottom, they didn't give away free matchbooks. This one has a little damage, but they're very collectible. The beautiful angel design is neat, probably $60 as is. Lorelei, or the mermaid pattern, is something that Van Briggle came out with really early on in their production. This is a later piece. You can tell by the mark, and also not a lot of wear on the bottom, because Van Briggle stayed in business for about a century. And this is the Ming Blue Turquoise. This is a color that is very popular. The values on these really depend in part on the shading of the turquoise as well as the age of the piece. If it's shaded a little bit more where there was a bicolor to it, it might go as high as 200, especially if it's an older piece. This one in the more monochrome is probably in the 125 range.
His dad was raised by the jockey that won the Kentucky Derby in 1913.
Oh.
And we've got some other stuff from him, though.
Oh, interesting. So your dad was raised by the winner of the Kentucky Derby the year before this. So this was probably a race he was involved with.
I found the race, and I know he was there that day for the racing records.
Yes. Oh, that is just fantastic. And the fact that it's a Tiffany piece, too, just makes it even more special. We're seeing other Tiffany Sterling trophies of about the same size and scale and age, and sold prices seem to be somewhere in the $4,000 to $5,000 range, and I think that's a reasonable estimate on this piece as well. This is a piece of Satsuma ware, and this is the first generation of Satsuma that comes over to America. And yes, I see where you have a piece that's broken and has been re-glued, and it looks like they did it in a reasonable manner. It could be fully restored. It might be worth fully restoring this particular piece. Satsuma's style of wear that comes from a certain place in Japan, and when we first opened up to Japan in the 1870s, Satsuma was one of the things that was considered very, very fine. And this is from the first generation of that wear that was being exported, because the quality of the decoration is very good. It's rather precise. It has great detail. In the second generation of Satsuma, they start not being as detailed as yours is. And by the third generation, which is around 1900, they're selling it as souvenirs at World's Fairs. And it's pretty sloppy the way it's made. So you have a nice early piece. If it did not have the damage, I would estimate this piece somewhere in the $800 to $1,200 range. With the damage, honestly, that does devalue it quite a lot. It might only be $400 or $500 in this condition now, but it's an amazing piece. At one time, there were probably a pair on either side of a mantle, but it is just really a very beautiful piece, and I'd say it dates to about 1880. There is a mark on the bottom. It was not originally intended for export. It doesn't have any American writing on it, but that was typical of the first generation of stuff, because they weren't actually wanting to open up and trade with us at all. This was the fellow who won RT Goose won the 1913 Kentucky Derby. Yeah. It's a more complicated watch for its time, too. You see that it's beveled in the middle to be flat so that they could see into the center, because they're looking at multiple arms that are telling you different things. And that's why 2-second hands, because you're measuring split seconds. So this is a really unusual piece to start with. And then the fact that it was owned by someone who won the Kentucky Derby just puts it in another realm entirely.
Matt Masterson used it in Cuba
to time the fight between Joe
watch
Johnson.
Didn't work. And he got this, Roscoe lent him this watch to time the rounds between Jack Johnson and Jeff.
Jess Willard, the title fight in Havana. Yeah, wow. Fascinating. Well, what a great story and background. I will be honest with you, this is such a unique piece that it's a little hard on the fly to evaluate it in a way that I think is completely accurate, because it's unique in its way.
At it, and he said the value on the watch alone is about $3,000.
Right. I would think the watch would be about a $3,000 watch, but the question is, how much does the story increase that value? It's with something that's so specific as this, until it actually would be sold at auction, there's really no way to tell absolutely for certain. We can only sort of base it on, well, what's another watch that has some sort of a celebrity connection or something famous in sports or something that might have a somehow similar story. But this is so unique. The provenance is unique, and because of that, but that's really just a semi-educated guess without the benefit of actually being able to do more research. And try to find something that might have some sort of a comparable story. It's really hard to say. I don't think I mean, I would think this would be something that would stay in family forever, but for insurance purposes, I would say you might want to insure this for 6,000 to 8,000 because you would never be able to replace it if it was lost. You would want to at least get an amount of money that felt like if I wanted to buy something similarly unique someday, that's what it would take.
This was always in my family growing up. I would always look at it. It was in my dad's family, so it would have been my grandmother, his mother, and probably his grandmother.
Wow.
So that was in 1800s.
Most remarkable thing about this piece is the condition because things like the strap on the purse are still there. The hand painting is very delicate in the faces. When we look at the bottom, it has a mark that says amphora. Amphora was made in what is now the Czech Republic, and it was very popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It's good quality porcelain. It's all hand painted. This piece is a little different than a lot of amphora. Usually it's more of an ivory body. This is more to the white, so we're looking at a little bit of a transition period there. And I would say based on the way that they are decorated and dressed, that this piece actually should date to sometime around 1905. And the reason I don't say earlier than that is they're all wearing very bright, white, happy clothes. And in Europe and America, until Queen Victoria died, you were supposed to be in mourning. Everything was black. She was in mourning for decades because Prince Albert died. Lots of people in the United States were in mourning because of the Civil War and people who had died. And so the fashion was very dark. And then when Queen Victoria died, it was like the sun came out and then everybody just wanted white and they wanted nothing to do with black clothes or anything. So that gives us an idea of the date. It's in really nice condition. It's a box planter, so it originally would have been for arranging flowers or even having a plant in.
Would you put dirt in that and plant?
Someone could have, and some people did. It wouldn't have been particularly good for the piece, but it was actually used more as an arranger for flowers in this case. It's got some wear along the gold, which is to be expected, but it's in great shape overall. Amphora, now porcelain figurines have kind of been static in the market for the last 25 or 30 years, but we are starting to see people interested again. If I had this in a store, I would probably price it around $225 currently.
Okay.
You can always tell Lalique. There's just such a nice softness to it. And it looks to me like it's got the signature there, and we're going to take a look at that signature because that'll help us date it. How did you get this piece?
I just bought it in the shop.
So when we look at the signature, it is R. Lalique, France. That makes a difference in the value, a considerable difference, because R. Lalique, René Lalique, was the original Lalique of Lalique glass, and the fact that it has the R in front of it means he was still alive when this piece was made. So this is an older piece. And that is going to change our value quite a bit. The fish are really neat. They're angelfish. This looks like something they would have done probably in the 1930s, judging by the shape of it.
When did R. Lalique die?
I think he died in the 40s, if I remember right. And there's damages. How much does the damage affect it? It's not on the rim. It's on the bottom where it's not too noticeable. This piece is worth approximately $1,000 currently in perfect condition. With the chip, I mean, I'm thinking that would affect it because glass collectors are picky. It might affect it 20 to 25% would be my estimate. So based on that, I would think maybe a $750 to $800 value in the condition it's in.
Okay.
Now, what'd you pay for it?
$100.
$100. See, I thought you were going to tell me something good like that. Well, you came out well no matter what. That's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
Now, hair jewelry is something that some people think is really creepy, but I think it's really interesting. It was very popular in the Victorian era to save hair for various projects you were going to do, and also you would make it into jewelry as a remembrance. So this is a chain, a fob, like for a watch chain. And it doesn't look to me like the fittings are gold. I believe they're brass. And
is it possibly rose gold?
It's possibly rose gold. You would have to have it tested. Most rose gold is 10 or 12 karat rather than 14, but it still would have carat value, but I know this isn't because it's got tarnish, and this isn't, but it is possible that these pieces are. And so I'll give you a value as if they are and a value as if they're not. The value as if they are not would be probably in the $125 range. If they are rose gold, you might add another $100 to that. Now tell me how you got this piece.
I bought it at auction, and the mark didn't it. I want you to tell me if it's authentic.
Yeah, and that is a good question with this. The mark on it is LCT, which would be Louis Comfort Tiffany. Tiffany did do iridized glass. I don't believe Tiffany did stretch glass, which is what this is. So I believe, and there were a lot of reproductions. Now, I don't think this is a reproduction, but in the 1980s and 90s, there were a lot of reproductions of the gold Tiffany glass pieces, and they were marked LCT, but it was not a proper label. Well, stretch glass like this, you notice it's carnival glass, it's iridized, but it's stretched out so that it's more broken up in the pattern. That is something that was very popular to do in the 1920s. Tiffany was continuing to make glass in the 1920s, but I don't believe that they did this finish. So I believe that what somebody did was take an old piece of glass and apply an LCT label on it, hoping that that would make it more valuable to somebody.
I've had other Tiffany pieces, and the pontil is right for Tiffany, and the weight is right. Do you think the mark looks authentic?
Well, the mark does, but there's such a, but there's,
I know.
I'm actually inclined to think the mark doesn't seem quite right either.
Okay.
I feel like the L is very straight and angular in a way that I don't associate with them. But again, it's just an etched mark with a tool, so that would be pretty easy to fake. If it was Tiffany, it could be worth $2,000 to $3,000, and they did indeed do red Favril. But I'm suspicious of this piece for those reasons.
Tried to research it a little bit online. I can only find like newer models that are going for about $1,400.
Yep.
But I don't know if the older one makes it more or less valuable, and it's a little dinged up.
I've seen field intensity meters at antique shows before because people like all of this sort of obsolescent stuff, although it really isn't obsolete. You could still use it. It's by RCA, so it's like radio reception signals, that kind of thing. Now, sometimes with these older ones, you'll see them in their military issue, and then they're worth money to the people who collect the military issue stuff for that reason. So then you probably would be seeing numbers closer to what you were seeing for the newer ones. And some of the people who buy these are buying them for function. So in that case, it's one example where a newer one is probably a little better. I think realistically your value on this one is probably more in like a 400 range would be where I would think to start it, but it's cool.
Lots of old signatures from old actors. It's got some play scripts. It's got all kinds. It's got the original bonds from when he started the movie company.
How interesting. Wow, this is really cool. So this is Miami Studios, Tilford Productions. This is really fascinating. This is your grandfather?
Great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather. Meet Walter Tilford. This hearing aid dealer's office is located in Hollywood. Oh, that's interesting. So he ended up doing that later in life.
A tornado hit destroyed his production.
Oh.
And he started working for Warner Brothers. There's some Warner Brothers stuff in there too.
They eventually did end up doing movies in Florida. He was just ahead of his time. Unfortunately, weather is a problem, but wow, this is neat. Mary Astor in her first important role. So what era would this have been? It looks like it's silent movie era.
20s.
Yeah, I see 1924. This is terrific. This is just really interesting. And I've got the Walter Tilford Group of Productions, Miami, Florida. I mean, it's just fascinating. It's an entire story about this person who had this really interesting life and is involved with the movie industry, who no one has really heard of, except you folks, because it's your family. Yeah, there we go. Another scandal, yes. Yeah, well, there was actually, movies could be kind of scandalous in the 1920s. It wasn't until the 30s that they got very proper about that.
From what I understand, I don't know if he did or he was just a part of it, of bringing audio to movies.
Really?
I was told.
Oh, that's interesting. This is just a really cool and interesting group of items because it tells about this person's very interesting life. Ooh, alligators used in Ramshackle House. It's so fun and it's so unique because it's the company's gone. This is our only connection to all of this. I mean, I'm sure a few of the movies still. Have you seen any of this movies? Are there any in existence still?
Honestly, I have mom.
She's got the reels.
My mother does.
Cool. This has value. This is another one of the, we're getting some really interesting things that are not the easiest stuff to evaluate, but that's great.
One of a kind. So how do you appraise that?
How do you appraise that? Yeah. So what you do in a case like this is, first of all, you look for who are some of the stars. If you were going to seriously want to sell this, which I don't know that you do because it's family and I can't imagine that this is going anywhere. There's Warner Brothers Studio where he's with the set staff. So if you were to properly market this, what you would do, honestly, is you'd go through the reels, you'd find a couple of the movies, you'd maybe get them burned onto something where people could see them, and then you would do a documentary on his life and show some of these pictures, show some of the things from the reels, establish him in the minds of people today as this pioneer who did these really great things. And then from there, you have more interest, and then the value will go up because people will appreciate it and understand who this is.
It's supposed to come over on the Mayflower.
Okay, English brass candlestick. And the question now is, could this have been hand formed and be old enough to be that age? The rivet is definitely hand done. I have in my possession a candlestick which is supposed to have been brought on the Mayflower in the year 1620. He attended the 300th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrims and received it there. Okay, and then somebody at Sigmund Rothschild looked at this, and this is back in 1951. The description is too incomplete for any accurate appraisal. If original, it has quite some value, but there's too many general factors to consider. I'd prefer to examine it in my laboratory. My charge is a $5 per object fee regardless of value. Well, that's awfully generous.
Buying it because of all this documentation.
When you think of people coming over on ship, okay, first of all, they're mainly fleeing religious persecution. That means they didn't have a lot of money. They wouldn't have had anything fancy. They also were not fancy people. They did not think that way. And so but this is utilitarian. So that means that doesn't rule it out right away. When I see somebody bring in some grand, wonderful thing and they say, my parents brought this on a covered wagon, I'm like, nobody brought anything like that over on a covered wagon. But this is a simple utilitarian small piece that could have been necessary aboard a ship. So we don't rule it out from that. I'm a little suspicious of the claim for a couple of other reasons, though. If it was meant to be used shipboard, I would expect it to have a heavier base, unless something was missing, because this could tip over very easily and then you're burning the ship up with a candle. It's definitely an English brass candlestick of the style that the English made, and they did this same style from the Middle Ages to 1890. I mean, they didn't really change very much. So then we try to look and see if there's evidence of it being handmade. How perfect are the rings? Are they exact all the way around? They seem pretty even. And to me, I don't know that even a really talented metal worker could have made them that uniform. So my guess, unfortunately, is probably they went to the 300th anniversary of the Mayflower. There's a little antique shop in town. Isn't that neat? Oh, that came over on the Mayflower, and all of a sudden we have a story. And more often than not, that's usually what these come down to, because there's no way to verify. No one has a picture of people on board the Mayflower using this, so there's no visual record we can prove it with. And there's no direct provenance linking it to a particular person in some way. I'm inclined to think that it just was a nice old English candlestick that some unscrupulous antique dealer thought, hey, we've got tourists in town. Everything came off the Mayflower. That would be my guess. I hope I'm wrong. I don't know how you could prove it otherwise.
Yeah, that's the thing I couldn't figure out, is how really prove it.
How would you really know? And that's the problem with provenance, is we have lots of, well, we were told this, well, we understand it to be, but we have to actually have visual record. I went to appraise a rope bed that had been in a house that ended up being used by the Virginia Military Academy cadets during the war. They were forced to go fight even though they were 16 years old. and under because they were running out of troops, and some of them were injured, and they put them up in this house. So there was all this record, but thankfully one person back then had a very early camera and took a picture, and you could see the bed in the picture, so there wasn't any question about where it came from. So unfortunately with this stuff, it's really hard to authenticate.
And I kind of looked into, I was wondering maybe if it was some promotional thing handed out during the Berlin airlift or the Rhine-Main.
Rhine-Main to Berlin, Germany, 1949. I'm sure they are referring to the airlift, actually. It's not there anymore, but yeah, Rhine-Main was the Air Force base. They were where they were lifting the stuff over to Berlin, so that's what it's all about. The motifs are definitely trying to insinuate that there's some sort of a military connection to this without saying that it's a military piece, because it's not a military piece per se. It's a souvenir piece to send home to a sweetheart. Oh, very nice. It's got the powder box and it's got the mirror and everything. Yeah, oh, that's very sweet. It's not made of sterling or precious metal. It's plated. Your collector for this, honestly, is probably somebody who is interested in German military history, World War II, the airlifts, all that sort of thing. That's your customer. So your customer is actually probably a military buff rather than someone who collects compacts. As a compact, you know, it might be $30 or $40. As a military collector, it might be $50 to $75, or possibly even a little bit more. It doesn't translate to a specific branch of any service or anything, but it's just giving us that overall look. So I think it's really interesting, and it's more interesting for curiosity's sake than anything.
I know. This came from the same place, this thrift store in the back of the plumbing section.
Okay.
Wow, really?
My dad bought it there when I was a kid.
In the plumbing section?
Well, he sold plumbing supplies and had a thrift store in the back.
Wow.
Went down there, yeah. And my dad, he insisted, and I told him it looks like something he's sitting up on the ledge in Olive Garden to me, but...
Well, you kind of are on the right track, I think. It's made in Italy, it says on the bottom. I would say that it's probably officially in the line of Capo di Monte ware. It's certainly looking like that anyway, with the hand painting with the putti, the little cherubs there. It's very cute. It was probably done in the 1950s approximately, so it might not have been that old when it was in the thrift store. Okay. Which makes sense because that's why it would have been in the thrift store at the time. But now there's a lot of interest in these sort of ceramics. This snake handle is really interesting. Yes, and there's a few little places where it's chipped a little here and there. This was very lightweight stuff, attractively decorated, but not really intended to be well made for durability. They figured you were just setting it down and who cares. I would say your value on this piece, it's big and substantial. I would think you might see $125 as a store price these days. So it's really cool.
I had no clue what he paid for it back then.
Oh yeah, back then it was probably a few dollars, yes. We are so grateful for the incredible support and the incredible growth of this channel. If you could please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe, because then we can let you know when future videos are happening. It really does help us with YouTube if you do all of those things, because then they know people like this kind of content and it lets us produce more. Tell me what you know about it. It's really cool. I like the design.
My dad, he was an auction sale guy since I remember, and I was little. He died a few years ago, and this was up on top of a little bathroom thing, and none of us know anything about it.
You're not going to find this on the internet, and I think there might be more than one reason for that.
And I showed Ralph a picture of it.
Uh-huh.
I said, "You ever seen anything like this?" And he said, he said, "I think so." He says, "I think those are really dangerous," and they all got crashed. It's right here.
Oh, yes.
And so it got crashed, and they put it up on top of the garage.
Right.
And
forgot about it.
I think it's just like a wooden bed with the ends of it
it's
bolted to the wood.
It's not handmade, and that was what you can set it down now. I didn't, like you said, I know it's a little, yeah, I was thinking at first that they might have taken pieces from a pedal car or something and made it, but no, I think it was made like this factory. I thought those lights were originally electrical, and now I see in here that they were. It does seem to be commercially produced, and the thing is that it doesn't seem like anything I've seen from any of the big makers, like the flexible flyers and the radio wagons and all that kind of stuff that we're used to seeing. They're usually all metal or all wood with metal wheels at that point in the 30s. And it's super streamlined, which I think is just really great. We're talking Depression era, and a lot of companies that made stuff like this were in and out of business so fast. My guess is that it was probably some relatively small, like a hardware manufacturer or something like that, because in the 30s, I know a lot of companies that were doing hardware tried to make toys in order to stay in business because they had the parts and they could put things together, and they figured, well, maybe it's another customer. You see a lot of metal toys, like aluminum toys from the 30s, that were made by obscure little companies that mainly didn't make toys. If it had any marks on it, it was probably painted on the wood, and it is long gone from sitting in the attic. I think it's really cool, and even dilapidated, I still think it's a couple $100. Because I sold a decent regular wood wagon from the 30s with regular wheels and just a decent wood bed for $100 recently, or $125, because people are liking them again. And this one's so different. I don't know if you ever talk to anyone in the toy associations or any of those collector groups, but I would say that would be the next step, is take a picture of this and see if you can find some forums online for people who specifically 1930s toy collector, and just throw it out there and see if somebody might recognize it or have seen one that was all done up. Because I agree with you, it's not something somebody made at home. It's a commercially made item, but I bet there weren't many. It's great that it's got the case, and it's great that it's amber, but it's especially interesting that the collar is solid gold, and it even says it on the side of the case. I've never seen that marked on the side of a case. You usually wouldn't advertise that, so this must have been. Oh, and it says real amber too. That's fantastic.
It's 14 karat.
I think the case is actually almost as interesting as the piece, although the piece is great. And 14K. It's a cigar holder.
Oh. In real amber.
In real amber. My sense of this piece is that, obviously age is going to be right around 1900 from the way the case is made. And if it were mine, I think I'd put 2 bills on it. I really do. Because if it was just amber without the gold, it's still a $50 or $60 or $70 piece for being amber rather than Bakelite. And then the gold is going to have gold value. And that might only be 1/20th of an ounce of gold, but that's still $100. And then you want to charge for the fact that it's got an interesting case and it's the object. So it's, it's about the collector. To me, $200 doesn't seem out of line.
Well, wasn't that fun? We got to see some things that we may never see again. And I just love doing appraisal fairs because I learn something every time, and I'm so glad to get to share this with you. If you are interested in having an appraisal done and you're anywhere near Marshall, Michigan, on Sunday, September 10th, I will be doing appraisals at Rosie's Auction House in Marshall, and we will have other appraisal fairs this fall, so stay tuned. If you can't come and see me in person, well, we will just have a lot of fun here showing you all the really great things people have. And now,
if you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video, and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help, and we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.